welcome to the season finale of Jets Final Drive. I'm your host, Jeane Coakley. Like always, I'm joined by SNY NFL insider Connor Hughes. And today, we're joined by John Jastremski. JJ, you were the guy who led us off, and you're going to finish off with us. Because, guys, we've actually made it. We've made it to the end of the Jets season.
A stunning development. I didn't know for a while there, Jeane, if we were going to do it. It was touch and go. I mean, it was... I said this last week when we did the show. Like, this has definitely been the most trying year of my NFL covering career, and it's still my dream job. I'm still doing a gig that I have to pinch myself to remind myself that I do this for a living. But when you're talking about the number of losses I've covered between the Jets and the Giants, just how sad everyone is, players, coaches, management. Like, it's not overly fun, and it's also kind of been the same story to write every single week. So I'm very much ready for the offseason and to talk free agency, draft, and everything that's going to come.
And JJ,
well, Connor, it's like deja vu for you.
You
too, Jeane. I mean, my goodness, it feels like it's the same old Groundhog Day again and again and again. And yes, Jeane, it makes sense because in my baseball playing days in the men's league in high school, I either batted last in the lineup or I led off because I couldn't really bat anywhere in between, just spraying the ball, running, doing my thing. So I think you guys here at Jets Final Drive got it perfectly. You either bat first, you bat last. There you go.
See, we did it. We know what we're doing, Connor. All right, just a reminder, though, before we get started, you can find the audio version of Jets Final Drive on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. So like we said, this season is finally...
Jeane, can I say something real quick?
Yes.
Real quick?
Of course.
Robert Saleh's in the news. He's going to interview for the Jags head coaching job. How about that?
There we go.
Yeah, how about that?
We're finishing the show talking about the Jets' former coach interviewing for the Jags job. Go figure. All right, anyways, so the season's finally over. The Jets ended their season 5-12, and hopefully we could put the drama of 2024 behind us and have a fresh start in 2025. That is, unless the Jets hire our old friend Rex Ryan. That's a thought. But before we get to the future of the team, let's take a look back at this past season. Everyone knows about the preseason hype and how they did not quite live up to expectations. That's to put it nicely. So, guys, in hindsight, looking back to the preseason, should we have seen this type of season based on everything we saw in preseason?
No.
Connor, we'll let you go.
Yeah, sorry. No, we shouldn't have, because in training camp, they looked very much like the expectations that or like a team that was ready to fulfill the expectations that we thought they were going to fulfill. The offensive line was so damn dominant in that joint practice with the Commanders. By the way, the Commanders are a pretty freaking good football team right now. The offense... Yeah, Aaron Rodgers, this like trepid career low yards per attempt, the dink and dunk, that wasn't prevalent in training camp. He was feasting deep, throwing deep. Remember those passes where he was attacking the Giants secondary in those joint practices with Garrett Wilson going deep? Also did it against the Carolina Panthers. And yeah, I know the Giants and Panthers stink, but still, this was the offense that we expected, the defense that we expected, and then it all fell apart in the season. I think that the firing of Robert Saleh, when you look at how the defense regressed and the overall team regressed, and some of the things like Breece Hall has come out and say, and Garrett Wilson's come out and said regarding Robert Saleh and how the team changed once he let go. Breece Hall specifically saying he was not the problem. I think that just started this spiral and spiral and spiral. And the two main keystone points of this year for the Jets, in my personal opinion, it was Jermaine Johnson going down against the Titans, because that suddenly forced and thrust guys who maybe shouldn't have been playing as much as they were into the rotation for the defensive line. And then all of those injuries that Aaron Rodgers dealt with towards the beginning and middle portions of the season. The two knee injuries, the ankle injury, and the hamstring that was almost torn off his bone. Those problems really held the offense back, in addition to Hackett and all that other garbage. But that really held this offense back, and then the defense regressed, and it was just a cluster you-know-what for this team.
And I think Jermaine Johnson, you mentioned the injury. I think his presence felt off the field as far as on the field. Like, you missed that leadership, you missed that guy. And JJ, how do you prevent future Jets teams from being blinded by this external hype?
It's $1 million question, Jeane.
I mean, this was a good roster, to be honest with you.
No question. And I'm with Connor. I'm with you. I bought into the preseason hype. I bought into the narratives. Let's think about this for a minute. The Jets were competitive 2 years ago. We're basically playing winning in Week 17 football with horrific Zach Wilson and Mike freaking White, who is a third-string quarterback playing in Week 18 for the Buffalo Bills just because they wanted to finish up their year and they didn't want to get anybody hurt. The Jets 2 years ago were one win away from the postseason, basically. Last year, despite Aaron Rodgers going down, they beat the Eagles. They were right there with the Chiefs. They were competitive, basically, going into December. This team was better on the offensive line. They ended up adding Devontae Adams, future Hall of Famer, 8 or 9 weeks into the year. And Aaron Rodgers played 17 games this season. Aaron Rodgers played 17 games. Garrett Wilson caught over 100 passes. You add Adams, and yet here we are, gang, and we're talking about a 5-12 football team. So as far as what to do to counter the hype, it goes to show you need to have a climate of success. And that comes from the people that you bring in. And I'm not blaming it all on Robert Saleh because, hey, the Jets have a 15-year drought without going into postseason. So this was not a Robert Saleh problem. This was Adam Gase. This was Todd Bowles. Yeah.
Isn't it only 14 years, not 15?
14, 15. Semantics, Janae. It's the longest drought in professional sports. The point being is this. That sort of leadership, that sort of climate that is around the Jets, it's got to change. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how the next GM and head coach finds a way to do it. But that, to me, is where it starts. Eradicating a lot of the nonsense that's come out of the building.
And what I just keep going back to, Janae, and it's been in my mind when I've replayed this season over and over and over again, is those first 5 games when they had Robert Saleh and they had Nathaniel Hackett before eventually, like, Hackett was going to lose his job or lose his responsibilities to Todd Downing no matter what. That was going to happen. Robert Saleh was making that move before he got fired. But the Jets were 2-3, and they were preparing for a game against the Bills for first place in the AFC East. Who were the 3 teams that the Jets lost to begin the season? A healthy San Francisco 49ers team across the country in the Bay Area. The Denver Broncos. The Broncos are going to the playoffs. The Jets lost to them by 1 possession because of their kicker. The Minnesota Vikings, a team with the second or third best record in the NFL that was just playing for the Detroit Lions for first place in the NFC and home field advantage. Those were the Jets' 3 losses. Healthy Niners, Denver Broncos, Minnesota Vikings, and they pulled the plug. For the Vikings and the Broncos, it was 1 possession, 1 score games, and it all just unraveled from there because I'm not saying Robert Saleh was going to get the Jets to the playoffs. I'm not saying Robert Saleh was a coach of the year. What I'm saying, though, is that the operation that the Jets had was sound because everyone knew their roles. The offensive staff was going to be Todd Downing calling the plays. Jeff Ulbrich, who I still believe is a very, very good defensive coordinator, had the defense humming where they were top 5 in just about every single statistical category. And then Robert was the CEO type. Would it all still want to fall apart because Aaron suffered the injuries he did? Yeah, maybe. But I do believe that ultimately when they lost Robert, they lost the leadership and the captain of the ship that was keeping everybody else steady. And I don't know, are they a 5-win team? No, I think they're probably more looking at an 8-win team, maybe 9-win team if Robert Saleh had stayed, and then maybe they could have snuck their way into the playoffs. You never know.
All right, and JJ, you mentioned Aaron Rodgers played every single game. He ended the season and possibly his career on a high note, throwing 4 touchdowns against the Dolphins and hitting 500 career touchdowns. Obviously, the Jets weren't facing a full-strength Dolphins. JJ, you know that quite well. But the game did give glimpses of what maybe could have been. So is there a part of you, JJ, that wants Aaron Rodgers to return to the Jets next season?
Yeah, 100%, because I look at the quarterback options for them next season. They're not great, Janae. The free agent market is not great. The draft class is not great. Oh, by the way, the Jets are not picking number 1, number 2, number 3 in the draft. I don't think they'll have a quarterback on the roster who's going to be as good and is going to be able to perform the way Aaron Rodgers did. Now, that all being said, I can read body language. You guys and gals, you're in the locker room every day with the Jets. It sure seems like we're heading to a divorce. It's just the body language, the cryptic messages you're getting from Aaron Rodgers going on McAfee's show every week. This does not seem like a guy who thinks full well he's going to be the Jet quarterback going into next year. I don't know what Woody Johnson is thinking. I don't know what the new GM and the head coach are going to be thinking. We'll see who they end up bringing in. But do I think we'll be watching Aaron Rodgers under center next year in a Jet uniform? I'd be very surprised. Now, Janae, I don't get to make these decisions. If it were me and you're asking me, hey, I ran the Jets, who do I want my quarterback to be? I'd run it back with Rodgers for another year. But I think he ends up in Pittsburgh or San Francisco?
Okay.
Probably not San Francisco, but Pittsburgh is absolutely the one to keep an eye on there, as JJ just said. I think the Kyle Shanahan, that ship sailed. I don't think that's going to happen there with Rodgers going back over there. But it is a fascinating debate to have, guys, because the one thing that was posed to me when I was like, oh, the Jets are going to move on from Rodgers, was how do we replace that production?
Yeah.
Because, Rodgers was flawed. The yards per attempt, like we were just talking about, it was low. He threw for over 300 yards just once. He led the Jets
to numbers right now up on the screen.
Again, you include the fact that it was the extra game, so eliminate 4 of those touchdowns, 1 of those interceptions, and 200-something of those yards if they were playing an almost 17-game season like every other Jets quarterback absent Zach Wilson. But the fact still remains is that, he didn't throw for over 300 yards but once. He only led the Jets to 30-plus points twice. The yards per attempt were the lowest of his career. He's very clearly, at this point in his career, a quarterback that doesn't need to be carried. That's not the case. We're not talking about like Peyton Manning in his final year with the Broncos, but he's more of a game manager where you'll randomly get little bits and pieces of the brilliant quarterback that he used to be, like you saw in the finale against the Dolphins, and the game against the Patriots, and the game against the Bills. Like you'll see little moments. You're just not going to see it consistently, but it's also everything that comes with Rodgers. So the production, it's going to be hard to replace. That player, that like you just saw, the almost 4,000 yards passing, the 28 touchdowns, you're not just going to pull one of those out of your you-know-what. Like, that's not going to happen. But it's everything that comes with Aaron that you need to take into consideration. The guy is 41 years old. His body has broken down his last 3 years. He had a thumb issue, remember that, his final year with the Packers, the Achilles injury his first year with the Jets, and now all the injuries that we were talking about a little bit ago this first year with the Jets. You also have the fact he's going to go on McAfee every single Tuesday. That's a major thing, because unlike other players where media relations and PR can control or know what's going to be said, Aaron is his own guy. Aaron does his own thinking. Aaron's not going to be controlled by anyone. If he has something he wants to say, he's going to go out there and say it. That's not going to bode well with everyone. You have a general manager and head coach where Rodgers, throughout the last few years of his career, has butted heads, whether it was with McCarthy, with LaFleur, with Saleh. Ulbrich, no, but there's other factors here in play. And the main one, I don't get the sense, even though Woody Johnson told the New York Post that he's going to leave it up to the general manager and head coach, I don't get the sense, and certainly Rodgers doesn't get this sense, that Woody Johnson really wants him back next year. I think this is something where the organization just prefers a fresh start and to turn the page on what has undeniably been 2 of the most disappointing years in franchise history. Get the new head coach, get the new general manager, figure it out at quarterback, whether it's Tyrod Taylor and someone like Justin Fields or something like that, but just turn this page, go on somewhere else, and let Rodgers go play with Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh.
I want to see this Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers experiment, how that's going to work.
They do like each other. It's like, go, Janae, you should. I don't think you and Scott look at each other with the googly eyes that they were throwing each other when the Jets played the Steelers. I mean, that was like that. There was some.
I mean,
some
have
love
you
in
seen
the air
Mike
there.
Tomlin?
And Janae, they're desperate to Steelers. Listen, Mike Tomlin, despite all of the success he's had as a head coach, he has not won a playoff game in, 7? It's going to be 8 years when Lamar Jackson and the Ravens smoke him on Saturday.
Hey, they did beat the Ravens earlier this year.
They did, and I know they've had success against them in the past. Their offense stinks. Russell Wilson is beyond cooked. They have one playmaker at wide receiver, and they're a win-now team, Janae. Mike Tomlin, if he's sticking around in Pittsburgh and if he's not going to be, quote-unquote, traded in the offseason, they want to win a playoff game. They're not dismantling that team. They're going to look at their options. I think they're going to have a hard time doing better than Aaron Rodgers.
I'll be reunited with Mike Williams. That's going to be real cute. All right, we're moving on. We're asking.
Good point. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
We have to finish. We have to keep continuing with the Jets. Moving on to topic 3. All right. So the Jets announced the team's awards, which the locker room votes on, and Jamie Sherwood took home the top honors as team MVP.
It's your guy. That's your guy.
SNY's
own pretty much. Do we cut him checks? I mean, he's on SNY so damn much. I think he should get that appearance.
He is the team MVP, obviously. Yeah. I mean, this man went from converted safety to being their main linebacker, and CJ Mills went out. CJ's my guy. It's the linebackers. I love the linebackers. All right, so JJ, I'll start with you. Who would you have given the Jets 2024 MVP to?
Had a really hard time with this homework assignment, guys, because you're talking about a 5-win team. So this was difficult. I didn't want to go with Sherwood. He had a tremendous season. He'd be my most improved player. I thought about Garrett Wilson, who statistically speaking kind of pops off the page at you, but there were way too many games where Garrett Wilson wasn't the focal point of the offense with the trade of Devontae Adams. And I couldn't give it to Aaron Rodgers because he's the quarterback of the team with his Hall of Fame resume, and they won 5 games. So what I decided to do, and I know I went off the beaten path a little bit here, I'm giving the award to the Jet offensive line after the injury to Tyron Smith, because I look at what the Jet offensive line was able to do. They played really well. Simpson was tremendous. Vera Tucker was tremendous. I like what I saw from Tippmann. Morgan Moses, when he's out there, is an absolute beast. And Fashanu, I can't say enough good things about him from what I saw in his first year coming out of Penn State. So I know this is unconventional, and I think it speaks to how low a bar gang it's been for the Jets on the offensive line. When they put Fashanu at left tackle in for Tyron Smith, their line really started to cook over those, mid-portion, mid-stretch of the year, if you will. I know I'm grasping here. You're talking about a 5-win team, so that's what I'm deciding to do.
No, I like it. I like that because you 100% right on every single thing you said. What about you, Connor?
I go with Garrett. Garrett Wilson, to me, he was, even for a guy that was targeted as much as he was, I thought he was criminally underutilized in the way that he got his targets, but you still saw the spectacular nature of his play. And one of the reasons why I give him the MVP is every single week, every single play, he is not a receiver that when the ball doesn't go his way or the ball doesn't come his way, he's throwing his hands up in the game. He's never checked out. He's not pulling a George Pickens where you don't know what you're going to get from him on the field. The guy just wants to win, and the guy knows that he wants to win. And when he's featured within the offense, the Jets usually do win. And when you look at what he's able to do with the ball in his hands, when you look at what he's able to do when he's featured, he is just this team's most dynamic, explosive, incredible player. And in my opinion, with Garrett Wilson, he is the guy that you build around. And there's absolutely frustrations building, and it would not surprise me in the slightest if, depending on what the Jets do, a quarterback, GM, and head coach, he goes to somebody and says, look, maybe I want to go play with C.J. Stroud again in Houston. Or maybe, you know what, the Chicago Bears need a receiver. Maybe that's where I end up with. That wouldn't surprise me. But Wilson is the guy that no matter what he wants right now, you do everything that you can to mend things with him because he is a player that you build around. And I think what's most impressive about him, other than his physical ability, which we see is absolutely spectacular, one of the best receivers in the NFL, undeniably the best receiver on this team, and probably this team's best offensive player, is that he just wants to win. He doesn't care about money. He doesn't care about fame. He just wants to win. And you see how much the losing takes a toll on him. Those are the people you want in the locker room. That's the culture that you want in the locker room. You want more Garrett Wilsons, not less. And that's why he's my MVP.
All right, very nice. Now let's move on. Now, JJ, you said that you would have given Jamien Sherwood most improved, which I think she deserved MVP, so whatever. So let's move on to next year. So who is your prediction for the 2025 Jets most improved player?
Wow, great question. And I'm going to put a little caveat on this because I think it depends, obviously, entirely on injury and what the timetable may look like for this particular player. Fashanu, I think, is going to be a stud. Absolute stud. And I know I mentioned him as a part of the Jet offensive line turnaround. If indeed he's able to go and play 16 or 17 games, I think the Jets got themselves, gang, a cornerstone at tackle. And that's exactly what they envisioned when they drafted him. And they passed up Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is going to be one of the best tight ends in the NFL. So you really want that pick to go and be a guy who's going to be a big part of what you want going for you moving forward. I think we're talking about Fashanu as one of those cornerstone tackles, and the Jets got one of those guys. I'm very bullish on what this kid can do.
Was it the Lions? Was it the Lions that passed on a receiver when they took Penei Sewell? Am I right? I don't know if that was the Chase draft or something like that. But
it was the Chase draft. Dolphins took Waddle. They ended up with Sewell.
Got you.
Worked
Okay,
out pretty well.
Yeah, that's what it was, and I think like that could be very similar where Brock Bowers is a stud, and yeah, the Jets could use playmakers and stuff like that. But one of the things that we said on draft night when people were losing their minds on why didn't they get a playmaker, when it pertained to Olu Fashanu was exactly what JJ said, was that if something happened to Tyron Smith, who was a major concern with durability, if something happened with Morgan Moses, who was a concern with durability, they were going to have to turn to Max Mitchell and Carter Warren to start. You saw what happened this year when they turned to Max Mitchell and Carter Warren to start, which is why Fashanu was, maybe not the best player on their board, but pretty close to 1, 2, or 3, and he filled a major need and gave them a major luxury. And it's just a shame that Joe Douglas spent his entire time trying to build that offensive line into a force to be reckoned with. He finally did it, and then he got fired and won't actually get a chance to see this through. But you got a hat tip to him because it was his final parting gift to this organization. My most improved, it's Malachi Corley. I know that there are some maturity issues with him at the moment, and that's why he hasn't necessarily been on the field as much as they expected. I think that he is the type of player who will be humbled. I think the new coaching staff will be able to connect with him. I think the new quarterback will be able to connect with him. And he's going to come back next year more refined, more improved, a better route runner with a better head on his shoulders. And you'll get to see that physical ability that was only flashed in bits and spurts in training camp to preseason. And then his one end around that was almost a touchdown before he threw the ball before the end zone. So he's my vote for most improved. Is somebody certainly going into next year. My most improved this year would have been Will McDonald, by the way. The fact that guy had 10.5 sacks is wild.
Well, I was just going to say, I can't wait for next year with Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald on the field. And, JJ, if you can give the offensive line MVP, I want most improved next year to be the defensive line because I think the two of them together, going to be fun. All right, topic number 4. The Jets officially have the 7th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. All right, JJ, here's the big question. What position do the Jets need most? What position do the Jets most need to address in this year's draft? Because we just talked about getting Olu and not a playmaker, and look what happened. So what are you going with?
A whole lot of all of the above. Quarterback obviously is the massive elephant in the room, depending on what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers. I don't know where you stand on Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. Are they even going to be available when the Jets are picking at 7th? Probably not, but Jeane, you could sell me on the Jets getting help on the defensive line. You could sell me on the Jets going and adding a safety. Is DJ Reed back on this Jet team, and the Jets going to be looking to go and add somebody to play alongside Sauce Gardner? I think when you're a 5-win team, Connor, best player available, nothing wrong with that. So I'd be very open-minded if I'm the next general manager to where I'm going to allocate that resource.
You really can't go wrong. All right, so Connor, should the Jets consider moving up to get a top pick or move down and try to get future assets?
I think the best possible thing that the Jets can do in this draft, and I don't necessarily know if it's going to be possible because it's really only 2 players at the quarterback position worthy of a top 10 pick, and it's Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, and they're probably going to go some variation of 1-2, 2-1, depending on the Giants trying to move up, all that fun stuff. When you see teams really starting to trade up, it's usually to trade up and get a quarterback, and that's when you can really recoup assets. But the Jets need a quarterback. They need a future quarterback. That's not Jordan Travis. They need a franchise quarterback on this roster. I don't think they're going to find it in this year's draft class, but next year's class, which could include Arch Manning if he doesn't go back to Texas again, and Drew Allard and some of those other players that are over there, I think the best thing the Jets can actually do at 7 is to trade back, recoup additional assets for 2026, start to build that cache of picks so that next year, if there is that quarterback, maybe the Jets do finish with 4 or 5 wins again and they're picking top 5 organically. But if they're not and they're a 500 team or a 9-win team with a veteran stopgap starter like a Kirk Cousins or Tyrod Taylor, maybe what the Jets can do, package those picks, trade up into the top 3, and get their franchise quarterback next year. And they will have the ability to do that if they recoup some assets this year for next.
Well, are you going for the GM job? Because they're in need of one.
I would like to do that. Yeah, that'd be fun. I don't think
everybody's being interviewed.
All those guys are hiring me though. Yeah, I don't think they're going to talk to me though.
All right. Anyways, the Jets continue their head coach and general manager search by requesting to interview over a dozen people. None of them included Connor Hughes. Right after the season is. So JJ, do you like the Jets' approach to hiring these positions? I mean, interviewing as many people as possible, except Connor.
Yeah, why not, Jeane? Listen, when again you have the longest drought in professional sports when it comes to not qualifying and making the postseason, they have had plenty of time to go through a list of names. So yeah, bring them in. It's meetings. It's getting to hear intel on what goes on with successful operations throughout the sport. I don't see what the downside would be. In a perfect world, you'd be able to go and identify a candidate and a target that you really want. And maybe that guy was Mike Vrabel, and maybe that went out the window once Jerome Mayo got fired. But I don't see a downside in bringing in as many GM and head coaching names as you want to throw out there.
Connor, are the Jets viewed as a top landing spot compared to other teams? Because how many other positions are open right now?
That's a tough one. I don't think they're the top landing spot. The best available position for anybody right now is the Patriots. I mean, you're talking about a player that is viewed and considered a budding franchise quarterback in Drake May. You're going to have another top 5 selection that you can either use or trade back to recoup additional assets. You have a owner that is known to be pretty patient, although he did pull the plug on Gerard Mayo after 1 year. By the way, that's because he thinks he's getting Mike Vrabel. And then you've got over $120 million in salary cap space. So that's the best position. I think the Saints, with their ownership, is going to be viewed very, very highly. The Bears' vacancy is going to be pretty high just because of the fact that they've got Caleb Williams, a lot of young talent. And if you view Caleb Williams as what many viewed him coming out last year, you're going to die to go work with them. And then the Jacksonville Jaguars is another opening where, again, an owner that's willing to spend, and you've got Trevor Lawrence. But the Jets are not an undesirable position. There's just some things that they're going to have to figure out. I mean, there's a lot of talented pieces on this roster already. That's a feather in the Jets' cap. Not too often you can get a top 10 running back in Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, an offensive line that is 4/5 stabilized, and the only weakness being right tackle, which should be a pretty easy fix in free agency or the draft. And a defense that, while they're going to be losing some people like DJ Reed, with the right coach on the sideline, can be a top 5 unit, because that's what the Jets were before Robert Saleh was fired. The problem with the Jets is you don't have your answer at quarterback. You don't necessarily have a means this year to get that answer at quarterback for the long term. And there are a lot of concerns with the salary cap situation. They've got $28 million right now. They can increase that to, I think it's $60 million with the releases of Allen Lazard and Devontae Adams. But then once they cut Aaron Rodgers, they're going to go back down to like $35-ish million in salary cap space, which ranks 20th, 15th, 20th most in the NFL. So it's not the most desirable position, but it's not one that people are going to be like, oh my God, no, stay away.
All right, topic 6, our last one of the year. Before we wrap the season of the Jets' final drive, we want to get your way too early 2025 Jets season predictions. But we're going to keep it real quick, all right? First up, we'll start with you, JJ. Who will be the Jets hire as head coach and GM?
GM, I have a hard time throwing a name out there because, look, you're going to have a tougher time getting a guy as qualified as Joe Douglas. I mean, Joe Douglas, from a resume standpoint, it couldn't have been any better. I'll say Ryan Grigson, who is a former GM with the Indianapolis Colts, whose resume looks a heck of a lot better looking at what the Colts have turned into over the last few years. And I'll say Brian Flores is going to be the head coach. He's got New York ties. He has head coaching experience, did a brilliant job with the Minnesota defense. And I think, Jeane, he can learn from the mistakes he made with the Miami Dolphins. I think for this climate here in New York, the Jets need a leader of men. Brian Flores is that. And they need a program builder. He took over a tanking Miami Dolphin team. Second year, they won 10 games. I think Brian Flores deserves a second chance. I'll say he's the Jets' next head coach.
Ooh, Connor.
I actually like JJ's. Like I would sign up for that, but for this, like I love Grigson. I don't think he's getting enough credit, and he's hated too much. I think Grigson would be an incredible hire for the Jets, and I think Flores would be an incredible hire for the Jets. I'll go opposite though, obviously, for not being the exact same. They're going to interview this guy from the Eagles at Alec Halaby. I didn't know that much about him. Somebody reached out to me when I was talking about potential GM candidates, and they said that this guy is a budding star. A lot of the master mindful, if that's even a word, things that Howie Roseman does in Philadelphia, he's the guy that's behind them. He's the guy that thinks of them. He's the one that takes him to Howie and says, hey, maybe we should try this. He's been brought up in one of the most successful organizations we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years, a team in the Eagles that just year after year after year is some variation of good. I think he would be an incredible, incredible hire for the Jets. A little outside the box. I know they want experience. I know they don't want first time. But he is somebody that I think, based off of what I've heard, and I don't know him personally, but just from what people have told me, I think he'd be a pretty good outside the box if the Jets decide to go with a first-timer. Coach, Aaron Glenn. He knows, again, first-time Jets want experience, but he knows how the New York market works. I was insanely impressed with the defensive job he's done with the Lions, despite the fact they've lost basically every starter they had before the season. Masterful game plan against the Vikings to clinch home field advantage. Comes from a winner, knows New York, knows the Jets, want to build the Jets into the winner. If he doesn't go to the Saints, I think he'd be a great hire for New York.
All right, next, give us one surprise offseason signing or transaction. JJ, you know what quick is. We'll work on Connor for this one.
Sorry.
My goodness, a surprise transaction? I don't think it's that big of a surprise. Give me a quarterback. Let's get nuts here. Kirk Cousins. If I'm going with the Brian Flores team, does that work? I'll go with that.
I mean, it would be a surprise.
It would be a surprise, no doubt.
You, Connor?
I like Kirk. I think Kirk Cousins actually ends up playing for the Giants, though. I think that's going to be Giants with Kirk and a rookie. Yeah, here's mine. It's a prediction of what's not going to happen. I think that there's a decent chance that Garrett Wilson or Garrett Wilson's representation ends up asking for a trade. Again, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I could just foresee that happening. If it does, though, Jets don't trade him. I think the Jets absolutely do not trade Garrett Wilson. I think they mend the fences with him, and I think Garrett Wilson is a cornerstone player for this franchise for the next 10-plus years. Will have his name in the Ring of Honor, will be known as one of the best Jets of all time. I don't think Garrett Wilson is going anywhere, even if the relationship right now is a little rocky, even if maybe he's not overly happy with the total direction of the team, maybe he doesn't feel totally loved. I don't care. The Jets will mend the fences with him, and Garrett Wilson will be a Jet for a very, very long time.
All right, our final question. And we will rerun this next season when we start this. And JD, of course, you'll be on our first show. You have to. What will the Jets' record be next season?
Oh, my goodness. I know Jet fans aren't going to love to hear this. What, they go 5-12 this year? I'll say they're one better. 6-11?
Oh, okay.
I'll go 7-10. I think 7-10. I think they'll win a couple more games because I think they'll get some decent quarterback play from Tyrod Taylor. I think they'll have another guy like a Justin Fields or something like that behind him will steady the ship when Taylor inevitably misses a month or so of games. But yeah, I don't think they're headed to the playoffs or anything like that. They need to get that long-term quarterback answer. But 7-10, I think, is a marked improvement from this year.
And JJ, one last thing. The final thoughts on this whole Jets season.
Wow, I have to give you a final thought. A bummer.
Hey, Connor, don't interrupt because I have something to ask you after.
No, I think it's going to go down as one of the biggest disappointments in the history of the Jet franchise. There was Super Bowl aspirations, Jeane, at the beginning of the year, and the team was basically eliminated by Halloween. So I don't know how you phrase it any nicer than that. It's a major, major bummer, and you hope that happier days are on the horizon.
All right. And Connor, my last question to you. Who's the number one press box food? Did the list change at all?
No, number one is still Dallas. Dallas is still number one. That's a restaurant, Jeane. You know that. I mean, you've been. It's a literal restaurant, and I think I have Tampa Bay number 2, and then Atlanta's number 3. But it's very, very hard to beat Dallas because honestly, guys, if you went into the Cowboys press box and you
beef.
Yeah, you get that caliber of food at a restaurant, you'd be like, yeah, it's a good meal. Like, you wouldn't be upset you got. Like, oh, these press box. Like, okay, it's good for a press box. Now, Dallas is an actual restaurant. Jerry's World is nothing better.
We going to any new places next year?
I got to check. I don't know. Is L.A. on the list? The only two I haven't been to yet are L.A. and Seattle. Those are the only stadiums I'm missing.
We have Tampa, Jacksonville we had to. Maybe
Tampa's
a reunion.
So good. Tampa's a top 5.
Reunion with
Connor's making sure he's on that trip for the Jets. He's orchestrating that one. He's making sure he's going to Tampa.
All right, guys, it's been fun. Even though, unless Buffalo moves up next year, you and I are not going to be friends after this year, Connor. Moving up. Hey, it's been fun, guys. Seriously, a lot of fun. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of Jets Final Drive and all season long. Once again, you can find the audio version of Jets Final Drive on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For Connor Hughes, JJ, I'm Jeane Coakley. Have a great season. And next year, let's talk playoffs, maybe?
Playoffs?